Einherjar attacked, following her command. Frankly, she need not have shouted it out loud. She could give the order silently in her mind. In a sense, this was a poor decision that gave away information to the opponent. Zeshi understood that as well. She shouted despite that to stir herself up and to strengthen her conviction even more. She made the Einherjar deal with the elemental while she tried to go after the girl herself. However, the elemental extended its hands out to the sides like it was trying to block the corridor. Zeshi didn't mind if this was how it was going to be. She and Einherjar would take the elemental in a rush and then kill the girl after. If the elemental before them was the one used by the Elf King, destroying it would be destroying one of the symbols of royalty as well. Perhaps that would slow down the Sorcerer King's plan by a bit. The two great scythes slashed the elemental multiple times in an instant. Frankly speaking, elementals, which didn't bleed and didn't really have any vital points, were troublesome opponents for her. On top of that, high-class elementals had resistances against physical attacks. Even Zeshi's scythe couldn't take them down in a single hit. This was not the kind of opponent Zeshi would choose given a choice, but she didn't have a say in this matter. Still, the girl's attack couldn't reach them either with the elemental obstructing the corridor, and it would be hard to get a clear line of sight to attack with magic from the scrolls. The thing they should be more cautious of was the girl being able to cast her strengthening spells on the elemental. I am the one at an advantage here because there are two of us, but it's not an absolute advantage. We can't go behind the elemental so we can't stop her from casting buffs, but... She wondered if the girl truly didn't realize this. Something bothered Zeshi slightly, but she couldn't express it in concrete terms. The elemental brought down its arms, which were made of boulders. She was about to jump back, but this wasn't a situation where she could slowly grind it down with hit-and-run attacks. She used the great scythe to hook the arm and deflect it. The earth elemental's attack had tremendous force behind it, but deflecting it by applying force from the side was easy. That said, this wasn't a weapon suitable for that, and she was only able to do it through brute force because of the overwhelming difference in their strength. She could see Einherjar doing the same from the corner of her eyes. Zeshi's Einherjar was weaker than herself. So, seeing that it was even possible for it, Zeshi confirmed that this elemental wasn't strong, just like she had expected. This was probably not the one used by the Elf King, the elemental the theocracy was most worried about. That said, it didn't mean that the earth elemental before them was exactly weak either. Someone only on the level of heroes wouldn't be able to avoid its punches. It was hard to be sure if the hit would kill them or not, but it would certainly damage them heavily. She dodged another attack and turned her gaze to the girl hiding behind the elemental. They were right in the bosom of the huge enemy, so it was dangerous to take her eyes off it, but it was far more dangerous to ignore the girl's movements. What she saw made her doubt her eyes. The girl was running away with her back turned to them. Though her running looked cute, she was unbelievably fast. She ran. She ran away. Quote! Exclamation mark, quote. Zeshi realized. This earth elemental wasn't summoned to handle her Einherjar. It was to stall for time so the girl could escape. She didn't realize based on the girl's attitude, but perhaps she was at her limits all this time. The girl never intended to fight or risk her life. Didn't her actions at the start make that pretty clear? That time when she retreated back with great force, when Zeshi tried to jump behind her, was not because she disliked being pincered, it was because she didn't want her escape route to be cut off. Her words and actions had put her intentions clearly on display. Damn. She needed to choose one of the three choices before her immediately. She could somehow catch up with the girl. She could defeat the earth elemental here for now. Or she could escape as well. Among them, she could easily put the third option into practice. The summoner couldn't give commands adapted to the changing battlefield to the summon if they couldn't see what was happening. So, for example, if the elemental was commanded to stay here and kill everyone that tries to pass through the corridor, it wouldn't chase after Zeshi if she ran away. But, if it was commanded to kill the woman before you, it would probably try to chase and kill her. That said, it would just give chase in a straight line and wouldn't use its brains to do things like trying to waylay her. So, there was no way it could catch Zeshi, who was faster and more agile than it if she did decide to run. If she ran away at full speed, the elemental would wander around aimlessly, searching for her like a mindless drone. However, she refused to do it. Refusal was the only path open to her. She couldn't avert her gaze from the possible future crisis, the Sorcerer King's schemes. Then, the choice was between the first and the second option. Catching up to the girl was difficult as well. Even if they destroyed the earth elemental obstructing them quickly, it depended on luck whether or not they could catch up to the extremely mobile girl. Plus, her reinforcements were probably waiting for them at her destination. Zeshi wasn't sure how the battle would end if that was the case. So the second option was the best one. It made her resolve from before a joke and would be completely meaningless if it turned out that this was not the one used by the Elf King. Still, considering the risk and the return, this was the only choice she could take. She shouldn't be tempted by the greener grass on the other side. Zeshi stared sharply at the earth elemental and then realized that the girl behind it, who had put some distance between them, turned back to face them. Zeshi continued to observe her without diverting her attention from the earth elemental, expecting the girl to say something. And then, the girl moved her lips. It's good that I conserved my mana. It shouldn't have been audible considering the distance, but maybe because of Zeshi's elven blood or because of her extremely high capabilities, she could faintly hear the girl's words of relief. Before Zeshi could understand the meaning behind them, the girl raised her staff high against the ceiling. One of Mare's classes was named the Disciple of Disaster, which had a trump card. It was the inferior version of the World Disaster's trump card. Its name was Petite Catastrophe. In return for consuming enormous mana, its damage surpassed even the super-tier spells that Ains could use. Of course, it was still not as powerful as Grand Catastrophe, but the raging torrents of energy born from it was enough to blow away everything in an instant. The very next moment, Zeshi was hit by tremendous energy. Bad. Will die. Zeshi immediately realized. The fierce currents of energy blew away the earth elemental in an instant. She finally realized at that moment that the earth elemental was neither a countermeasure for Einherjar nor a wall to let the girl escape. It was nothing more than a decoy, to keep Zeshi and her clone from escaping that single tyrannical attack. And in reality, her Einherjar had also disappeared just a moment after the elemental did. Following that. Not yet. I will not die. I will not die. Though the storm of destruction raging around her was sweetly whispering to her to give up and take it easy, Zeshi brought all her vitality to the forefront to bear through it. But her consciousness weakened. She could no longer sense the pain that had been stinging all over her body from before. She could no longer even sense if she was still standing or where she was. So this was how death felt like. What the heck is this? That was the only thing that she could think of. Wasn't she supposed to fight, risking her life, after this? Wasn't she supposed to fight with all of her body and soul to protect the theocracy, her country, from the fiendish enemy and their diabolic schemes? How mean. Of course, it was just Zeshi excusing herself. She realized that even amidst her awareness fading away. Even so, she couldn't help but complain. She didn't feel any relief at the elemental getting destroyed. It probably meant that it was no more valuable than a sacrificial pawn. Or, maybe they thought it was an acceptable loss for taking out the strongest trump card of the theocracy. In the end, who was that girl really? If she really was from the Sorcerer Kingdom, to what extent were they dancing on their palms? This was defeat. She finally realized that defeat didn't mean getting taken down by the enemy's attack. It was getting one's wish, which they put their body and soul into, smashed without a trace and then falling into an endless pit of despair. Cruel. She didn't want to lose. Her wanting to taste defeat was an outright lie. She only wanted to deny her own strength. Or maybe, deny her mother. Deny the blood that ran through her veins, and the loveless days it made her go through. But, if she could have protected what she held dear with this unwanted power. Even though she would have probably forgiven her mother a little then. Even though she seriously didn't want to lose for once. All those feelings still ended up getting crushed. I hope at least that she isn't from the Sorcerer King. And then, the world went dark. Ains left the elven treasury along with Aura. The conclusion was that they don't know yet if it met their expectations or not. Ains wasn't sure about the value of a lot of things there, like the strange fruit which was larger than a palm fruit, actually larger even than Aura. The fact that most of the items were made of materials easily collected from nature instead of precious metal was even more disappointing, but he still held a slight hope that they had some rare or unknown abilities. So, Ains wasn't exactly in a bad mood. In fact, he was feeling pretty good. The goods were not here anymore. Ains sent them to the log house near the overground level of Nazarick using gate. He probably surprised the Pleiades on standby in the log house, but he didn't have enough time to explain the situation to them while Mare was still left alone. He only managed to loudly command them to carefully store the items sent inside the log house, considering that some of them could be dangerous. After everything was done, Ains resolved himself and turned to Aura with a serious expression, which was the same as his usual bony mien. Well then, I am relying on you. Aura. Okay. Aura gave an energetic reply, turned her back to Ains, and squatted. Frankly speaking, the speed at which he could run was completely different from Aura's. He would probably be easily left behind. Of course, she would slow down a bit as she would have to carefully follow the trail of the Elf King's blood. Still, Ains wouldn't be able to keep up despite that. He also had equipment that would greatly raise his speed alone, but a change of equipment didn't just mean changing the required part and being done with it. The gear Ains usually equipped were strictly coordinated for things like the overall resistance distribution, equipment weight, and the increase and decrease in parameters. He would need some time to go over the coordination again if he were to break the balance. He wouldn't need to spend time if he used consumable items like scrolls to increase his speed instead, but his miserly nature stopped him. He wasn't sure if he could keep up with Aura even after going through all that trouble either. So they chose the most suitable option here. He was to be carried by Aura. Of course, an adult man getting carried by a little girl was extremely embarrassing. Even Ains felt a bit ashamed of that. His embarrassment gradually accumulated, probably because the suppression wouldn't kick in with such lukewarm emotions. But Mare's life depended on this choice. Mare would win against the Elf King without a doubt. From Ains's estimation of the Elf King's strength, he had no chance at victory. He was also exhausted and heavily wounded on top of that. However, there were no such things as absolute certainty. Ains hesitated to ask about the situation through a message even though he wanted to, fearing that he could end up diverting Mare's attention in the middle of a fight. So, it was best to meet up with him even if by only a second sooner. Then, Ains should throw away his embarrassment if need be. It was not a choice he made as Suzuki Satoru, but as Ains Ulgaon. Naturally, there arose one more doubt after that. How exactly should he be carried? If he was going to be carried by Aura, then there was the choice of getting carried in her arms like a princess. Maybe some would even prefer a ride on her shoulders. Ains chose to be carried on her back. No, to be precise, it was Aura who decided that. At first, Ains proposed to be carried over her shoulder like a piece of luggage. He would have been less embarrassed that way, and it was also more suitable in the sense that he could ironically joke that he was unnecessary baggage. But, upon proposing that, Aura told him, I can't handle Ains-sama like luggage. After he realized that it would take some work to persuade her, Ains gave in. He didn't dare propose getting carried like a princess. His mental stability wouldn't have held. So, he ended up getting carried on her back. Having already resigned himself to it, Ains climbed onto her small back, cheering with a "Dakoisho" in his heart. Following that, he took out a short sword from the item box and held it. He was not sure if he would need it, but it was better to be prepared. An elemental skull created from Ains's Summon Undead 10th floated beside them. Why didn't he create an undead to carry him in Aura's place then? There was a simple reason why he didn't. It's because he would need to leave someone behind as a diversion in a critical situation. He intended to use an undead for it so he and Aura could escape. So, he decided not to summon one to ride it. Of course, he could just get down from the undead when they met an enemy, but that moment could end up being fatal. Ains felt that he was being too cautious, but this was a battlefield where the chances of something unexpected happening were too high. It was necessary to make preparations to some extent, like to retreat immediately with an undead as a wall, for their own safety. Elemental Skull was more of an attacker than a tank. He summoned it despite that because the tank wasn't always the most appropriate choice to use as a diversion. Incidentally, he wouldn't recommend an attacker acting as a tank in Yggdrasil. Furthermore, only monsters like Touch Me-san were able to build into being both a tank and an attacker at the same time, so he wouldn't recommend that either. Well, it was more like no one would be able to do that normally. However, if one wanted to insist that they could, they were free to do so. Aura sprinted. Following the faint trail of blood, she descended down the stairs for a few floors. Then she stopped. She looked away from the floor towards the direction they were heading for. Ains followed with his eyes as well but couldn't sense anyone there. He wanted to ask her what the issue was but decided to wait for her words, ready to command the elemental skull immediately if something unexpected happened. Ains also thought about another possibility. And he was right. Ains-sama, I received a message from Mare, I see. Ains replied with a serious tone. It sounded out of place considering he was sitting on Aura's back, but he had to use a tone befitting of their master. From your attitude, it doesn't seem like Mare asked for help. So, did he capture the Elf King without an issue? About that, it seems like Elf King was already killed, what? From Ains's point of view, the Elf King without his primal earth elemental was weak, but not enough to be unable to escape from or be killed by the inhabitants of this world. So there is one more strong individual here other than the Elf King. What did Mare do after that? Yes, he took down that strong individual, but it seems like they are still breathing. What are your orders? Mare said that it's highly possible they are holding some important information, that they could have probably watched the battle between Ains-sama and Shaltir. What? You mean that battle? Could they have a world item? We will go there, secure them, and immediately return to Nazarick. There's no time. Aura, it will probably be hard on you but I will be depending on you for just a little bit more. Aura specifically mentioned the enemy to be a strong person, instead of people, so they were probably alone. However, it was also possible that Mare chose those words because it was a group where only one of them was strong while the others were just riff-raff. It's better to retreat to a safe place as quickly as possible when one was unsure about the enemy's numbers. That will not be a problem. But we will be going fast. Ains-sama, hold on tight. Aura dashed the moment her words ended. She was far faster than before, not slowing down even at the corner, but instead kicking off the walls to change directions. It felt like a jet coaster, though he had never ridden one. Although this body couldn't be affected by fear, he felt a bit afraid. Perhaps his line of sight being this low to the ground increased his sense of fear. He could move at about the same speed when he changed into a warrior, but running on his own two legs was completely different from experiencing these sudden curves, accelerating and decelerating at someone else's whims. They saw Mare after what felt like a few seconds to Ains. Mare was carrying an unknown human over his shoulder, dexterously holding his own staff and something that looked like a strange sickle together in one hand. He had a lot of questions like, I heard he was killed but where is the Elf King's body? Or, what happened to his magic items? But they couldn't have such a relaxed conversation in a hostile area. They should retreat for now. Ains, carrying himself brazenly with a serious expression, like he wanted the others to understand that this had been necessary and that it was completely normal, climbed down from Aura's back. He thrust the short sword into the floor. It was hard to memorize this featureless corridor in a short amount of time, but it should be a bit easier if it's the place he stuck a recognizable sword in. He also memorized this short sword very clearly so he could use magic to connect to here directly. Then, he activated Gate. Go ahead. After a shy acknowledgement, Mare entered the gate while holding the human. Ains dispersed the elemental skull and followed after him along with Aura. The other side of the gate was where he previously threw the contents of the elven treasury. Ains found Intoma, who probably came over to retrieve the items, bowing upon his arrival. She probably guessed that they were going to come through when she saw that a gate had been activated again. Death Knights, who were likely here to help Intoma, were standing around aimlessly. Welcome back, Ains-sama. Yumu. Continue with the retrieval, Intoma. Is the ring with you? Yes, it is. Then give it to Aura. And, Aura, this one's an important source of information. It will be bad if she dies. Quickly, but carefully, carry her to the frozen prison. On that note, I don't think we will have to remind Neuronist, but don't forget to take off her gear. Ains-sama, may I have a word? What's the issue, Mare? Is there something to worry about? Why yes. This human was very strong. I cast Sandman's Sand on her, but if she woke up for some reason, I don't think Neuronist Sand can win against her. I see. Then Aura, you should stay beside that woman until either I or someone else arrives. Be on guard. Aura wore the ring and activated it, teleporting while holding the woman somewhat gentler than Mare did. After seeing her depart, Ains turned to Mare. Well then, Mare, why do you think that human watched the battle between Shaltir and me? This was his greatest doubt. Why yes. That human used both Ain Samas, the goal of all life is death, and Shaltir Sans Ain Hariar. It's impossible that it was completely unrelated to that battle. What did you say? Normally, having a single skill strong enough to be called a trump card was the limit. To hold two such skills was impossible in Ains's opinion. In that case, Mare's hypothesis was probably right. Maybe it was something like a copy skill. You did good taking her down without killing her, right? Why yes. I too thought that she would end up dying from petite catastrophe, but it looks like she had a lot of health, so she didn't die luckily. You used petite catastrophe. To think that she didn't die from even that human is certainly strong. You've been really fortunate. So what happened to the Elf King? Hearing about the end of the Elf King from Mare, Ains wrinkled his non-existent brows. Time stop didn't work on him, so it was highly likely that he was equipped with an item to nullify it. He wanted to retrieve the equipment, but he also wanted to gather intelligence from that woman at the same time. Retrieving the equipment should be prioritized, as that human wouldn't be escaping from Nazarick anytime soon. Then, let's send Pandora's actor. He can also search around for stuff that I've missed. Or, should I send him to investigate that human? No, I am better than Pandora's actor. In that case, Ains turned towards Intoma. Intoma, just wait for a little bit longer. I will be calling Pandora's actor. After hearing Intoma's answer, Ains activated message. Epilogue. Albedo, having finished greeting her master who had just returned from the elven country in the frozen prison, returned to her master's quarters and resumed her work. Her workload had increased with the destruction of the kingdom and its vast territories placed under their control. However, Albedo possessed a talent for internal administration, so it wasn't a problem that she had to rack her brain over. As a result of a majority of the cities being razed to the ground, the distressing problems, their occupation policy in particular, had also been reduced to ashes. For that reason, Albedo was using a large part of her brain's resources to review the creation of a manual they could use in the occupation policies for each of the various countries when they would eventually be placed under their rule in the future. While it might be possible to scale the one they used in Erantel to the level of nations, it was not difficult to imagine kinks forming in the process of broadening the scale and scope of it. In the end, it was better to just apply the methods for administrating a city to the cities and the ones for administrating a state to the states from the beginning to avoid mistakes in the distant future. Of course, she didn't believe that they could apply those policies as they were in every country. If the races were different, then the cultures and other elements would also differ greatly. Still, they should be able to use them as a broad framework nevertheless. I'll have Demiurge and Pandora's actor look over the materials of completed, and after that, I'll need to get Ains Sama's approval. If she borrowed the wisdom of those two, the model she had made would become even better. I could make use of that girl, couldn't I? It was a fact that it would be faster to have her own master, who was full of wisdom and intelligence, look them over right from start. He would be able to perceive things much deeper than those two, but there was no way she could approve of proposing something that had its problems laid clear at a glance in her position as the guardian overseer. While thinking about that and other things, she tidied up her documents. Albedo, report to the frozen prison immediately. The sudden message made Albedo jump in surprise. She sensed a burning rage in her master's thoughts. Once one reached a certain level range, a resistance to mind control was essential. It was obvious that depending on the time and situation, being charmed or controlled could instantaneously lead to defeat. There were no floor guardians who hadn't taken countermeasures against those effects. In spite of that, although it was slight, the reason why Albedo felt panicked was because even though external psychic effects were ineffective on her, the same was not the case for the emotions gushing out from inside her. She had been found out. There was an affair she had been carrying out off the record from her master. Could it have been discovered? Had Demiurge gotten wind of it and reported it to their master after all? However, it was still in the experimental stage. She hadn't put it into full-scale operation. Would that much rage be directed at her in spite of that? Still, that was the only thing that she could think of that would cause him to direct feelings of anger against her. She didn't know. Albedo hurriedly activated the ring's power and headed to the frozen prison. Her master was standing in front of the cage of a half-elf they had captured in the elven country. Behind him was the area guardian Neuronist and the figures of Aura and Mare. Her master's expression was no different from normal. Nonetheless, she could feel an intense fury radiating from him. Albedo flew to the feet of her master and immediately prostrated herself before him. My deepest apologies. What's wrong? From that baffled sounding voice, she instantly realized that the source of her master's anger was different than what she had thought. That being the case, prostrating herself had been a bad move. But she had been thinking about what sort of excuse to make just before she came here. Even though their master was wiser than her, she believed that with enough time spent, her plans could rival even him. I hope I can pull this off. If there is something that Ain-sama is offended by, or has angered him within Nazarick, then it is all the fault of the Guardian Overseer's dissatisfactory work. I also feel bad for Tabula Smaragdina-sama. Therefore, I believe the most appropriate thing for me to do is bow like this and apologize. No, you're wrong, Albedo. Let me first correct your misunderstanding. This anger is not directed at Nazarick. A sigh of relief spilled out of Albedo. It wasn't an act, it was the real thing. If that is the case, then what in the world has happened? Before that, could you raise your head, or rather, stand up? I don't really like seeing you, who has done nothing wrong, prostrating yourself. Thank you very much, Ain-sama. While announcing her gratitude, Albedo stood up. She was a little concerned about the looks of suspicion that had appeared on Aura and Mare's faces for a moment, but right now there was something more important than that. Then what sort of information from that prisoner of war has earned Ain-sama's displeasure? She was talking about using control amnesia to collect information. The explanation she had received was that even if her master, who had accumulated a lot of practice using it, were to search through memories spanning over a long period of time, just taking glances at them would take weeks of time. If he were to take a detailed look in order to obtain important information, it would require years of time, and if one were to go so far as to alter or falsify memories, it would take decades. There might be a lot of people who would think that viewing memories was a form of interrogation where obtaining false evidence was impossible, but the information that was acquired was nothing more than what was the truth for that individual. It goes without saying that it was more than possible that even that individual had been deceived. If you tried to get confirmation, you could entrust them as an information source without peering into the memories of multiple people. If you were to do that, then no matter how much time you have, it would never be enough. Ultimately, choosing a much simpler method of acquiring information was more realistic, her master had grumbled. It was the same for modifying memories. For example, if her master had burned a certain village to the ground and the surviving inhabitant of that village, a blasphemous and malicious man who sought power and, although it would be absolutely impossible, managed to ascend to a level high enough that they would be able to injure her master. It's wrong to think that he could be used after they had solved the problem by wiping away his memory about her master being the one who burned the village. While that inhabitant of the village lived his life to seek out the power to take revenge, he would probably talk to someone about his grudge against her master. If you didn't erase everything up to till that point, a huge inconsistency would be born within that man. Because although he wouldn't remember who had burned his village, the memory that, over a drink, he had talked about how, my village was burned down by an undead named Ains, would still remain. However, it appeared they had tried to use it because it was convenient to gather information even while the prisoner of war was unconscious. It's Shaltir. From those few words, she was able to guess almost everything that was to come. Who is that woman affiliated with? Albedo. Yes. Albedo knelt down on one knee. Drop everything you're working on right now, except for those matters related to the defense of Nazarick. We are going to utterly annihilate the theocracy immediately. This is a fight they picked with us. We will have to accept their challenge properly, don't you agree? His tone was gentle. However, the emotions deep inside his voice were the complete opposite. How long had it been since he last showed this much rage? Yes. I believe it is exactly as you say. I will immediately relay your orders to all of the floor guardians and transition to making preparations for war. Very well. Do it at once, Albedo. At once. Albedo bowed deeply, trembling at her master's gentle tone. Afterward. Hey guys, Maruyama here. Long time no see. Thank you all so much for picking up this book and for reading this far. I had written in the preview at the end of Volume 14 that Volume 15 would be out in early spring 2021, but it ended up being about a year late. But, you see, I thought that everyone would just say, well, I guess we can forgive you, since Volume 16 came out right away. You'll forgive me, right? 2 books in 1 year. Less than back greater than when I was less than just greater than a reader. I would have thought that was a little slow, but it's not something you can understand if you're not in that position after all. The current me, Maruyama, has become much kinder to the other authors less than writers, greater than. I say less than to myself greater than all those guys are busy too, so it can't be helped. At any rate less than be that as it may. Nevertheless, greater than, a lot of things happened, and it's been rough. If something good happened then it was wonderful, but I kind of have a feeling like only bad things have been happening in the world. However, around the time this book comes out, the 4th season of the anime will have already started less than airing greater than. Honestly, it feels to me like that's just about the only good thing that has happened, but it might just be the least worst thing that is happening. It would have been awesome if I could have sent you guys some much brighter subjects less than topics greater than, but unfortunately that's all I've got. In any case, here's to the 4th season of the anime. This is all thanks to everyone also supporting it. Overlord is ending in 2 more volumes. Please keep me company for just a little while longer. Though how many years we're talking here is something that even I, Maruyama, don't know. However, if I can get the last 2 volumes done, I'd like to have them come out close less than in time greater than to each other like this time. Although I might need a little time to get things ready for that. But, I will at least put in the hard work to get them out as fast as possible. Now then, finally, I would like to give my deepest thanks and appreciation to everyone who made Overlord, volumes 15 and 16 happen, and to everyone who picked them up. Kugane Maruyama, June 2022. Information. Source text. Hattori additional editing. Fire Dragon 1X version. 0.30927222.